Now, another part of this is looking at the potential threats to the building. Basically, I'd say, how do you make your building earthquake-proof? Would be the simple way of thinking this. Now, once again, my just fascination with buildings, but if you look at earthquakes around the world, and you look at the number of people who will die in earthquakes. So, a Category 6 earthquake in Tokyo, you might get one person dies, probably because it's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Whereas a Category 6 earthquake in Armenia, every person in the whole village will be dead. What's the difference? Okay.
The foundation.
Well, the foundation of the building, but also the way that the building is built. So, in Japan, there's earthquakes every day. Okay, most of them are just around like maybe 4 or 5, but the whole place is constantly shaking. And so they've realised there is a constant threat, and so we need to build to make everything wobble. And they do really well. Okay, and so people just, oh look, earthquake, just keep on typing, whatever. Don't even run out of the building screaming. Whereas other places where they're not expecting an earthquake, you're going to build in the cheapest and fastest way, where everything is rigid. And it's just like rigid bricks, rigid clay. I remember actually, it was a number of years ago, there was an earthquake in Indonesia of exactly the same magnitude as there was, I think, in the Middle East. Indonesia had almost no deaths, but the Middle East, it was tragic. It was horrendous. And what they came out with, they were saying that this particular... And the interesting thing was, both villages, the buildings were made out of clay. But the difference was that in Indonesia, they had bamboo interwoven in the bricks. And so the buildings just wobbled. And they were all kind of still broken up, but they held together. Whereas the other ones just all collapsed. Now, once again, this is just one of my personal things that I occasionally have a rant about. But we're living in an age where there are so many things threatening the faith. So many things threatening people's lives and their belief in Christ. We're also in an age where people's response to that is to try to build a faith which is really rigid. And we've got a lot of people trying to become more and more traditional and more, orthodox and, but it's got nothing to do with what you believe. It's got more to do with there's no room to move. And it's almost like there's this anxiety, like as a response to the threat, we're going the other way and trying to become more and more rigid and fixed. And we even do this with our programs and our structures in the church. It's like, this worked before, it's going to work again. Okay, this is the only way we do things. My personal belief is that we need to be building things earthquake-proof, and we need to be building people earthquake-proof. And so what that means is you need to give room for doubt. The great danger, well, the traditional program has been to give answers. That we're going to tell you this is how it is, and you believe it, and you don't question it, and then everything's going to be okay. And we're just going to reinforce that catechism again and again and again until you know that it's absolutely true. And then you leave our youth group as a flourishing young person, believing in the faith, and you go to university and you encounter Marxism, and gone within the first week of OWIC. Okay? It happens so often. I was talking to a family just the other day, and one of their kids had come to our youth group and youth events for years and years, and I was saying, oh, whatever happened to him? And they're like, yeah, he's a Marxist. He's a rabid communist now, because he went to university. And I was kicking myself, because I was like, we didn't prepare it. Of course it was going to happen. It's happened to pretty much everyone else as well. It's happened to most of our youth leaders, not just our young people who attend the groups. So in terms of what is the message that we're presenting, you need to present a message that actually starts with doubt. This is my personal thing. Okay, take it or leave it. But fundamental to the whole idea of the new evangelization, there's a guy by the name of Fuzz Kitto. He was a youth ministry consultant. You can get an idea what his beard looks like just by his name. I think he's actually Coptic Orthodox. He does like 6 months in Egypt and 6 months in Australia, working with youth groups. But he put forward a really simple explanation of the difference between traditional church and new evangelization church. And basic summary of that, he basically says, okay, traditional church is where everyone comes to us. New evangelization church is where we go to them. Traditional church is where it's all about practice and doctrine, whereas new evangelization church is where it's more about relationship and encounter. But the traditional church is all about answers and right thinking, whereas new evangelization church is more about you've already encountered God and we're now going to go on a journey together to discover the truth. And I think that's the way we've got to start thinking. So once again, traditional church is where we've got the answers and you need to learn, whereas new evangelization church is you've had a genuine encounter, we've had a genuine encounter, let's walk together. Now, I think we need to really start implementing this in the whole way that we do everything. That you need to start encouraging people to ask the questions that they're already asking, but they're too ashamed to ask. Okay, you're going to have people who come to your parish, and they're going to be like the most zealous Catholics ever, and they'll recite the creed to you, they'll talk about the latest theology books they've been reading, but they're actually racked with doubt. Deep down, they are holding onto their faith by the thinnest thread. And you actually need to encourage them and say, you're actually allowed to doubt. You're allowed to question. You're allowed to be angry. And that's a starting point for real conversion. You need to then go on a journey to say, well, where is God? My wife's dying of cancer. Where is he? Good question. Don't come along as the priest who knows the answer and try and give them the answer. Like, the best thing you can say is, I don't know. But I'll walk with you and we'll try and find out. How about I come to your place and have a cup of coffee and we can read the book of Job? Seriously. Fun times. After that, move on to Lamentations. But we kind of need to let people realise that it's all about questions. I think for far too long, our teaching of the faith has been as though there's consensus, right? Like as though anyone who actually asks a good question is stupid, or somehow being rebellious. The whole of the Bible is a question. The whole Bible is basically saying, where is God? Why are the good people getting away with the stuff and the bad... So why are the bad people getting away with stuff and the good people are suffering? Sorry, I got that one wrong. The whole thing is filled with doubt. The whole of the Bible is doubt. But it's a journey. That's the whole point. It's like, who is this God? And I think that's the way we need to be building this house. Like if you're working with a group or a parish, this needs to sort of come through everything. It needs to come through your preaching, it needs to come through your conversations. Give people permission to go on a journey. And I think what you're going to end up with is with a building which is much more solid, or much more earthquake-proof. If you look at... Sherry Riddell wrote that famous book, Intentional Disciples, Making Intentional Disciples, whatever it's called. You're aware of the book? Yeah? Familiar? Good. She basically lists off a series of steps of faith that people go through, which always fascinated me, because she says that the most basic encounter of faith is the level of trust. And then I think the next is curiosity, and I forget how the rest of them go. But she basically says people go through a series where initially they trust the authority. Okay, they trust the priest, and the priest knows what he's talking about, and so I have faith in God because of that. But then they start to become curious to try and discover it themselves, and they start to move into a place of encounter. If you look at where the church currently is, where you've had so many people leave the church because of broken trust, you know, with the sexual abuse crisis, which is now worldwide, the people who have left, I think it's symptomatic. It's symptomatic of how shallow we had actually taken people. We'd only taken people to the level of trust. And we basically said, you don't need to question, you don't need to think, just trust me because I'm the priest and I'll tell you what's right. And so we were actually setting ourselves up for failure. The ones who have stayed are the ones who have actually had an encounter, or at least are curious to go on a journey to discover. So in terms of how you are going to help build your ministry, you've got to be very aware of that. Like you actually need to take people beyond the level of trust and actually start to get them to ask the hard questions. Ask the subversive questions. You know, if you're running a youth group, you want to be getting the kids to ask questions that are going to make their parents complain to you. You know, you want the parents calling up saying, what are you doing with our kids? You know, they're coming home questioning the faith. You know, good. That's the way it should be. You should probably be questioning your faith as well. How about we catch up and have a cup of coffee and read the book of Job? So I think this is just, in terms of the way we build, we've got to build differently. Okay? How are we going for time? Let's keep moving quickly. Any questions at that point?
It's more of a feedback, just to kind of, maybe you touch on this later. I'm thinking, like, there's a young man I know who's because of life circumstances, is struggling with faith and the reality of God in his loving circumstances and stuff like that. My personal thing is, let's say if I were to take this approach to him, the collateral would be so bad that I personally wouldn't have the facilities myself personally to walk that journey with him because of my own limitations. How can, I know this is a discernment thing, how, you know, what degree, but I think I can apply this to a larger degree as well. How can we do this in such a way where the collateral, like, we're not able to handle marriages and, you know, sick people, you know, yeah.
Yeah. What you say is true, that you want to be very careful about what battles you get involved in. However, I think central to this whole thing is that you don't need to have the answers. You just need to be prepared to say, I'm going to walk alongside you. And I'm going to affirm you that you're on the right path. Story that came to mind as you were saying that, I remember hearing a story about JP2, you know, Karol Wojtyła, when he was teaching philosophy in Poland. Obviously Poland was strongly Catholic, but under a Soviet regime where there was a very strong atheistic mentality. And the story was told that as he was talking to this packed room of students, one student put up their hand and just started basically accusing JP2 of being stupid. How can you believe in this God? And just started giving reason after reason for why God does not exist. And the whole room was dead silent because all these kids are Catholic and they know that this person's accusing a priest. And they're just like, and JP2's response was, he looked at all the other students and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to point out that is what a theologian looks like. Become like that and you'll be on the right path. And this kid who was trying to start an argument suddenly got destabilized because they're like, well, hang on. What do you mean theology? But he went on to basically say, that's what theology is. You're meant to question. You're meant to doubt. If you're doubting, you're on the right path. And I think this is the problem, that because we've had so long this mentality that to be a good Christian means to not doubt. Therefore, if I doubt, I must be losing my faith. And the building's collapsing, it's all falling apart. I think we need to be in a place where we can actually affirm that and say, well done. You're finally getting it. You know, you're actually on the right path now. Sit down and give me your questions. I probably won't be able to answer half of them, but this is good. I want to go and find out as well, you know. Give it a go and just see what happens. I think you might be surprised. Firstly, if that kid is already questioning his faith, he's already going to lose his faith. So in a sense, you're going to lose nothing. Currently, you've got nothing in place to rebuild that. So that gives you a little bit of a freedom to say, well, let's just try whatever we can, because he's probably already on his way out already. If you can actually turn it around and say, tell me your questions, because if you're right, I've got a lot to gain here. I sometimes love using that where, how to explain this? Years ago at Explosion, some of you may have actually been there. We did this Q&A session about the faith. All the reasons why the Catholic Church's position on stuff was correct. And there was this kid who'd come from this other school, different state. And at the end of it, he basically said one question, because there was two of us presenting. He said, in one sentence, tell me why I should believe you. And the other guy gave a whole 5-minute discourse. He didn't give one sentence. And it didn't sound convincing. But it gave me time to think, what's my answer to that? How do I prove in one sentence why he should believe me? And the only answer I could give, I say, look, at that time I said, look, I'm a 35-year-old celibate who owns nothing. I've got a lot to gain if I'm wrong. I want to be wrong. I've been trying all my life to be wrong and I can't prove myself wrong. That was the best answer I could give. But I think that's almost the place we need to start. It's so often we're trying to evangelize people to our position. I think a different way to do it is say, you evangelize me to your position. Turn the tables around and say, look, I've got a lot to gain if God doesn't exist. Prove to me that there is no God. Okay? Because I genuinely want to know. I don't want to be living like this if I'm wrong. That's a simple way where it can just change the whole dynamic, and it actually gives permission for questioning. But it also puts the questioning in a very genuine position, so it's not playing a game where I'm just trying to prove that I'm right and you're wrong. It's not an apologetic session. It's genuinely, let's go on a search because my life depends on this. I think if you just give people that permission, they're going to breathe a sigh of relief. It takes away a lot of the shame, because there's a lot of shame around doubt. And I think they're actually going to genuinely encounter something. So,
just a question following on. You might cover it, if you're going to cover it, just ignore the question. Where does faith encounter arise? This is an intellectual model, questions from my heart, from my psyche, from my hurt, whatever. They're leading me to ask these questions. Is faith a precursor, or is this a precursor to faith?
Yeah, good question. So to what degree is encounter more important than knowledge, or is knowledge more important than encounter? I think both are woven together. Because I often hear people say that, well, the last few years what we've tried to do with the Explosion Conference was start to really address a lot of these questions. One of the first bits of kickback we got was people saying, but surely it's about encountering Jesus. This is all about in the head. We shouldn't be in the head, we should be in the heart. And I was like, well, okay, firstly, let's just look at the results. Okay, how many of these kids have come every year and had a powerful encounter, and yet the next day gone back and still been drinking alcohol and sleeping in with their boyfriend? Okay, firstly, look at the data. Okay, because a lot of the time we can put so much weight into, look at them, they're all got their hands raised and they're all crying. They're crying because the lights are dimmed and there are candles, and just what happens. But once again, every year we're putting this building up, and the building looks amazing, and then 2 days later the building's collapsed. because we haven't asked about the foundation. We haven't stopped and said, well, what is causing it to collapse? Okay, there's a sinkhole here, which is undermining the whole process. And that sinkhole is because they are so angry at the rejection they've experienced from their father that the only way they know how to medicate their pain is through sex and alcohol. And then that just leads to a whole process of shame, which means that everything they just encountered after reconciliation and the encounter with prayer suddenly vanishes within 2 days. And then a year later they come back and do it all again. Now, how many times can you go through that cycle of, spiritual high, crash, shame, burn? You can only do that for so long before suddenly you give up on the whole thing. And I think that's what the data would show. So I think it's got to be both. I think if you look at where... question you asked me years ago about the book, The Cross and the Switchblade. The story of the Cross and the Switchblade, you've got a guy who is working with really broken young people in gangs in New York. I think it's New York. And through the grace of the baptism of the Holy Spirit, they experience what seems to be a miraculous conversion. Now, from my memory, the question you basically said was, surely it's all about just praying for the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Like, that's just all we need to be doing, and then it just works. But I think what we end up doing is we actually miss the background that is actually there in the story. Like the fact is, he doesn't pray for the baptism of the Holy Spirit until many months after he started working with them. There has been a whole process of him healing those father wounds by the fact that he's just committed to them. There's that great line in the movie where Nicky Cruz comes up and says, "Preacher, I'm going to cut you into pieces." And he says, "You can cut me into 1,000 pieces and every piece will say I love you." Now that is healing. Okay, this guy would never have heard that before. And so in a sense, that is ministering deeply to that broken foundation, and it's shoring it up. Like, it's actually rebuilding the foundation before you then have the encounter with God. If he'd walked in there the first day and says, "Guys, come together, let's pray with you," probably nothing would have happened. And so I think we just got to sort of realise, to get long-term fruit, you need a deep foundation, or at least you need to start to heal the things that are most likely to undermine the building. You can't heal everything. Really, the whole process of discipleship is going back and trying to go through those foundations, pull out the rocks, pull out the things that are broken. But you need to try to address what are the most present, urgent things that are going to cause the building to collapse. And I don't think we're normally asking those questions.